So thank you all for joining this week's Web Tips presented by myself, Ken Engel. Just so everybody knows, everybody is muted by default. You can ask questions at any time during the Web Tips. And I believe I should get a notification up here and be able to see any questions. Yeah, I do. I'm sorry, I'm working with a new interface here. I haven't used Zoom yet for Web Tips. But you should be able to ask questions and I should be able to see them and answer them at any time. So I've been doing development for about 5 years now, mostly in UX, game development, and agile methodologies. I've been with CPS for about 3.5 years now, and most of that time has been spent developing Winshuttle solutions. So the topic today is mostly surrounding Winshuttle Composer and form locking with team assignments. So just as a general overview, the purpose of form locking is being able to have a single user take ownership over a group assignment. So, if you need to assign things to multiple people, but you only need it actioned by one of those people, that's where form locking and team assignments can be very helpful. So how can this be done? There's a few methods that you can use. 2 of the methods we'll be going over are available across all versions of Winshuttle Composer, but one of the methods I'll be going over is only available in version 12. And I have a demo for the pre-version 12 pieces of functionality, but not the version 12 because we're going to be working in version 11 today. But I'll give you a brief overview of kind of what the version 12 version is like. So pre-version 12, there's 2 options you have. There is a 2-step team assignment approach, which is a very simplistic approach, which requires 2 back-to-back assignments and pretty minimal setup to get it functioning. So I've seen in the past people or clients not wanting to go with the 2-step approach because it can be a bit convoluted, as a user will have to take ownership by approving one task and then they'll see another task automatically pop up in their queue, which is what they actually have to action. So having 1 step back to back and 2 different tasks can be a little bit confusing. So a lot of clients tend to go with the 1-step form locking approach, although that requires quite a bit more setup and time to get it working. It offers a lot more robust functionality and is a lot less confusing to the end users. So this one, the 1-step form locking approach only requires 1 task assignment and has lock and unlock button functionality on the form itself. And in version 12, you could still use any of the above solutions from the pre-version 12, but version 12 now does have out-of-the-box form locking functionality. So the 1-step approach that I just explained is a custom implementation that we created, which is using a little bit over 100 lines of custom JavaScript. Whereas in version 12, there's an out-of-the-box functionality which doesn't require any JavaScript, and it's very simple to set up. I went through it and set it up myself before this, although I don't have a demo of that, unfortunately. It took very minimal time. So if you have version 12, you can get kind of the best of both worlds and minimal time to set up, but also having a little bit more robust functionality in the form locking. So the 2-step team assignment, as we just went over, 2 back-to-back workflow tasks, 1 team form view with an accept task is required. So what that would look like is basically a view of the form with any data you want to show the team, and then a button on it which accepts the task. So any one of those users in the team assignment can click that button to accept the task, and that task will then be assigned to them. And I'll go over all this. I'll show you the demo solution that I set up so we can see exactly how it's set up. But this requires a current user control on the form, as well as a workflow participant control. So you're basically capturing the email address of that user who clicks the button and then putting them into the swim lane for the subsequent solo assignment, which is the one that they're actually going to be actioning and editing data for. So the one-step form locking, as I went over, requires a bit more setup. Although there's only one form view, this form view contains a lock and an unlock button. This requires 7 additional form fields for the locking functionality, 2 of which need to be promoted to SharePoint. And those fields kind of capture the user, if any, that currently has the form locked to them. And I believe whether or not the form is locked. So that would be the 2 promoted fields in SharePoint. And then there's 5 rules on those fields which handle deciding, whether or not the form is locked, and handles showing and hiding the fields that can be edited based on if the form is locked. So, obviously we don't want to allow users to edit fields until they have locked the form to themselves. So with this functionality, there's a rule that hides all of the fields that can be edited to users that do not currently have the form locked to them. And again, we still have a current user control, which captures the current user's information. So we could decide who currently has the form open, and then if they want to lock it to them, that's the user we use to lock it. There's a view rule, which runs custom JavaScript to load the form in its current state. So that would be any user who opens a locked form. This JavaScript will find the user who it's locked to and see that the current user that opened it is not the user that it's locked to, and will hide the fields that they shouldn't be able to edit. And then, as I mentioned, there's 123 lines of JavaScript code, and that handles everything I just spoke about, which is, deciding whether things should be shown or hidden based on who has it locked, and then handles the locking and unlocking functionality, which is basically just, editing those SharePoint fields. And then finally, we have the V12 form locking functionality, which requires a bit of setup in the workflow. So new to V12, there's an option on the swim lane itself, which decides whether that swim lane can contain form locking functionality. So the swim lane will have a lock type property, which can be set to manual or automatic. So the manual locking functionality requires a lock button on that form view in the swim lane with the lock action type. So if you've ever worked with buttons in a form in Composer, there's default actions such as approve, save and route, save, close, etc. So lock and unlock is just another one of those options. So in this case, you would just put a button on the form, choose the lock and unlock type for that button, configure the swim lane to make sure that it is team from role, and set the lock type to either manual, or to manual in this case if you're using the button. And that's pretty much all you really need to do to get the form locking functionality. There's no JavaScript required. You don't have to create any of those rules that I mentioned in the previous slide. It's pretty quick to set up. And the difference here with automatic is you don't need a button on the form. It automatically locks the user which opens it up. So this might be undesirable because a user might not necessarily want to lock it to themselves just by opening it. They might want to view some data, decide if they want to lock it to themselves or if somebody else needs to lock it, and then close it without locking it to themselves. So it might be undesirable to use the automatic. Manual definitely doesn't require much more setup, but offers more versatility. So now we have the demo. So before I go through the actual demo of the SharePoint form, I'll show you kind of what I mean by some of the setup in the form here. So in the workflow, we have the team assignment and the solo assignment. And this is basically the two-step process. So first we have the team swim lane, which assigns it to everybody that's in a particular SharePoint group. So everybody will get that task, which in this team view has that accept button. So then the first person to click on that task, click the accept button, their information is captured and they're used in this swim lane. So then they will be the only person that is assigned this task, and that is the actual task to be actioned, which has editable fields. And then for the form locking assignment, again, everybody in the team is assigned that task. But then we have the lock and the unlock buttons. So when you click the lock button, it runs a assign JavaScript function, which locks it to the user that currently has the form opened. And then, of course, unlock does the opposite. It runs an unassigned function, which removes them from this. And then there's also a pop-up, which confirms whether or not they actually want to do that. So the important thing to note here in the functionality, there's a hidden field, form locked formatting, which is the driver of what actually shows and hides all of the groups on the view. So I only have one group on this view, which contains information that we want to edit. But if you have, say 5 groups on the view that has potential editable information that you don't want users to see if they haven't had the form locked to them, you would put this field in all of those groups because this field contains a rule which hides all of the groups containing this field. Or if the form is locked to a user, shows all of the groups containing this field. So any group you want shown or hidden as a result of the locking functionality would need to contain this field. So basically, the first rule on this field is just hiding this field because this is just a hidden field that contains the functionality. We don't want this to be shown to users. And then, as I explained, we have the hide and the show functionality based on if the form is locked or not to the current user. And then we have the logic, which sets a field, which actually sets this field to determine if the current user is the user that has locked the form to themselves. So if the current user is equal to the locked user, then we want to be able to show all this information to them. But if the current user is not equal to the locked user, then we want to hide everything. And I won't really go over the JavaScript too much in depth, but just as an overview, we have 3 functions. One, which is just some basic SharePoint functionality, which loads kind of like a SharePoint, the SharePoint API, which allows us to interact with SharePoint list data from the form. Because what we're really doing to make this functionality work is in real time, we're editing some SharePoint columns. Because, if you're familiar with Winshuttle and routing forms, typically SharePoint columns do not update until the form has been submitted. You can edit form data in the form and change the form data in the form, but that won't change a SharePoint column until you've actually submitted that task. So this is the way that we get around that by running some JavaScript in the form to, in real time, update those columns so that as soon as a user clicks the lock button, they don't need to submit anything. It goes and immediately updates those SharePoint columns so that anytime after that, that a user opens the form, we have JavaScript that'll check those SharePoint columns and then determine if the user who opened the form is the user who locked it or not. So that's all that these functions are doing here. This load form checks that, and then assign assigns it to the person who clicked the button, and unassign unassigns it from the person who clicked the button. All right, so now we will get into the actual demo. I'll just put in some test data here. So that was the originator view. Now we will go and open up that task as a team assignment. So you'll see in the process list here, there's a few instances of the team assignment. So this is assigned to, looks like 7 people right now. And me being one of those people, I'm going to click on this team assignment and accept the task, and you can see it's all just read-only information. Now we're at the solo assignment step, so you can see that I am the only user who is currently assigned that task now. And I kind of combined the two bits of functionality into one view, but this is, if it was the true two-step approach, this is where you would open the form and immediately see the editable data that the user needs to edit, and then they'd be able to submit from here. So again, this step can be a bit convoluted and maybe confuse users, which is why you might opt to go for the locking approach. So now if we're looking at the locking functionality as a user, I come in here, we can just pretend like this is the team assignment. Multiple people have received the same assignment. As soon as I lock it to myself, you could see that that group that we had this field in appears, and we have the data here that we're able to edit. And if I unlock it, my name disappears, it's no longer locked to me, and I'm no longer able to see that data. And you might, what makes this functionality a bit more robust is, you can extend it to do pretty much anything you want. You might want to extend it so that if a user has locked it to themselves and then decides to unlock it, you might want to clear out any data that has been entered by that user so that they can't submit it with, data even though it's not locked to them. There's plenty of ways that you can extend this. There's a project that I worked on where we used this lock functionality on a view that contained a bunch of transaction scripts. So we wanted users to be able to see all of the transaction script data, but not be able to click the buttons to run the transaction scripts unless they had the form locked to them. So instead of hiding entire groups, we just hit buttons. So really, you can extend this in any way that fits your requirements. It's a pretty robust functionality. And then I had one set up earlier, which I had locked to my username. My Kent Angle username. And then we have the WSDev2 user logged in here, just to show you what it would look like if another user locked the form and I'm trying to go in as a separate user. So you can see here, the lock2 user is Kent Angle. I can't see anything because it's not locked to me. If I try to lock it to me, I can force it to lock it to myself, but it'll prompt me that Kent Angle already has this locked, and they locked it on this date and time. Are you sure you want to lock the form to yourself? So, if you click OK, it'll go forward with that and force the lock to yourself. But maybe I don't want to do that because somebody else is already working on this, so I'll just back out. And just to give you an overview of how it works in version 12, it's quite similar, although when you click the task and it's already locked to somebody, you won't even get into the form itself. So you won't be able to see any of this form data here. It'll just pop up with a full screen SharePoint message saying that the form is locked, it's locked to this user. So there might still be reasons to use the custom approach in version 12 because it does allow you to view the form if you choose based on how you want to set it up. You know, as I said before, like if you're using this on a screen that requires a bunch of transaction scripts to run and you only want to hide the buttons, but you want users to be able to see the data to determine if they want to lock it to themselves or not, you can do that with the custom approach. But as far as I know from playing around with it, you can't do that in version 12 because it doesn't even bring you into the form. It just brings you up to a kind of like an access denied message. So that's really about it for the form locking. So in conclusion, I have a kind of a list of pros and cons here. The two-step team assignment pros are low time to set up, no custom code is necessary, low risk in having issues and less testing time because there's no custom code. The cons are that it requires 2 steps back to back, which can be undesirable from an end user perspective because it's a little convoluted, could be confusing. And the functionality isn't very robust. You know, there's no showing and hiding or anything. It's just showing you read-only data, you accept the task, and then it's giving you another task with not read-only data. The one-step form locking approach pre-version 12, which is the custom version, pros, there's a lot more robust functionality. You can extend it to however you need for, you know, whatever your requirements are. It's only one step, so it's a lot less confusing to end users, you know, making it a lot more user-friendly. The cons are that it requires custom code, longer time to set up, and can be more issue-prone. You know, just because anytime you're introducing JavaScript, it requires a bit more testing and you know, a little bit more expertise than the drag and drop Composer out of the box functionality. And then the one-step form locking in version 12, pros, out of the box functionality, easy to set up, no custom code necessary, user-friendly, low time to set up. But the cons are that it's still not quite as robust as custom form locking. It's better than the two-step approach, but it's kind of a combination of the two. And the big part of that, as I stated before, is that instead of bringing you into the form and allowing you to see some data if you choose, it displays a kind of like an access denied message. So, you know, it's better than the two-step, but not as robust as the custom one-step. So at this time, I was checking periodically. I did not see any questions as I was checking, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them now. I'll continue to go through my spiel for our events coming up, but I will check after I go through my spiel to see if there were any questions. So feel free to input those if you have any questions. But our next couple events coming up, we have on Monday, November 14th, the Northeast Ohio Data Analytics Meetup. And you can go to www.clearprocesssolutions.com. There's an events tab in the top right corner if you want more information on that. And then Thursday, November 21st, we have our next Winshuttle WEBtips session, which will be covering plugins to upload documents to a directory. And of course, this WEBtips can be found on YouTube at a later time if you'd like to review anything. And I'm still not seeing any questions. So hopefully that means I explained everything perfectly. All right, so if we don't have any other questions, thank you everybody for attending today. I hope you learned something new. I hope you can use something that you saw here today, and have a great day.